Welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is a really comprehensive, rigorous, but still accessible exploration of the foundational blueprints of human survival.
Absolutely. It's such a crucial topic.
Right. And we're drawing our insights directly from Dr. Linda S. Costanzo's masterful text, Physiology 6th edition.
A true classic.
Yeah, it really is. So whether you are a medical student prepping for boards, or maybe a young professional in the clinic, or just, an intensely curious self-taught learner, we're exploring the human body today, but not as a parts catalog.
Oh, definitely not a parts catalog.
We're looking at it as a unified system dedicated to one overriding goal, which is homeostasis.
Right. Maintaining that perfect internal balance.
Exactly. Now, usually when we look at an anatomy chart, there's this expectation of distinct borders, like a map,
Oh, for sure. The color-coded maps.
Yeah. The heart is here, colored red and blue.
Yeah.
The kidneys are over there looking like two little beans. And it creates this illusion that the body is just a collection of, isolated machines operating in their own little silos.
Well, it is very comforting to categorize things like that. I mean, we prefer to think that a heart problem is just a heart problem.
Right. It makes it easier to digest.
Exactly. But when you step into the actual living, breathing world of human physiology, those clean borders completely vanish. We are looking at a functional landscape that is just a fiercely integrated web.
Everything is connected.
Everything. Nothing happens in a vacuum. To really understand how we survive, we have to trace that journey from the microscopic fluids trapped inside our cells all the way up to the complex, body-wide crisis responses of the cardiovascular and endocrine systems.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can look at how the body responds to stress or trauma, we have to understand the environment it operates in, right?
The liquid foundation.
Yes, the liquid foundation. It is so easy to forget we are mostly water. It makes up roughly 50 to 70% of body weight.
Which is a huge amount when you think about it.
It is. And this water isn't just sloshing around randomly. Costanzo breaks down the compartmentalization beautifully. 2/3 of that total body water is intracellular fluid, or ICF.
That's the fluid physically locked inside our cells.
Right. And then the remaining 1/3 is extracellular fluid, the ECF. But then that ECF is split again, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It splits into the blood plasma circulating in our vessels and the interstitial fluid that physically bathes the cells.
So they're physically separated.
Exactly. Those compartments are separated by critical barriers. The cell membrane separates the ICF from the ECF, and the capillary wall separates the interstitial fluid from the plasma.
Wow, okay.
And what is crucial to grasp here is how the composition of these fluids is maintained. It's not a static pond.
Right, it's constantly moving.
The system relies on energy-consuming pumps, like the sodium-potassium ATPase, and this pump is constantly actively transporting ions against their gradients to keep the intracellular and extracellular environments distinct.
I like to think of the body as this massively complex, high-tech aquarium.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Yeah, so instead of just looking at where the water is, we need to look at how it shifts. The intracellular fluid, the ICF, is the fluid actually inside the fish.
Right.
And the extracellular fluid is the water the fish are swimming in. Then the plasma acts like the active filtration tubes, moving water in and out of the tank.
That paints a really clear picture.
But to keep that aquarium's environment stable, with the right pressures and the right chemical gradients, you need an invisible command center, right? Running the pumps and valves without anyone having to consciously press a button.
Which brings us to the autonomic nervous system, the ANS.
Exactly.
The ANS operates entirely below the level of conscious thought, and it has two main branches. The sympathetic nervous system, originating in the thoracolumbar region of the spinal cord, which orchestrates the fight or flight response.
The panic button.
Right, the panic button. Then you have the parasympathetic nervous system, originating in the craniosacral regions, and that drives the rest and digest functions.
But, we are always taught that the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems are exact opposites, like a constant, exhausting tug of war in the body. Do they ever actually collaborate to achieve a single complex outcome?
That is such a pervasive misconception.
Wait, really? They don't just fight each other?
Not always, no. I mean, they often act reciprocally, meaning sympathetic activation targets beta-1 receptors to increase heart rate at the SA node, while parasympathetic activation targets muscarinic receptors to decrease it.
Okay, so that is the tug-of-war part.
Right. But they can also be entirely synergistic. A classic example from the text is the male sexual response.
Oh, interesting. How does that work?
Well, parasympathetic activity controls the erection phase, while sympathetic activity controls ejaculation. You literally need both. working in a highly choreographed sequence to achieve the biological function. It is a very precise dance.
And when that choreography fails, the results are immediate, right?
Extremely immediate.
The text highlights a clinical case of Scheidegger syndrome, which is a condition involving autonomic failure. The patient experiences severe orthostatic hypotension.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
He basically faints the second he stands up out of bed.
Because without that invisible autonomic command center instantly telling the blood vessels in his legs to constrict when he stands, gravity simply pulls all his blood down.
So he just pulls in his legs.
Exactly. Venous return to the heart plummets. And following the laws of hemodynamics, cardiac output drops proportionally, and his brain is momentarily deprived of oxygen.
Wow.
The fainting proves how utterly vital this background operating system is.
So the baroreceptors fail to execute the command, and gravity just wins.
Gravity always wins if the system fails.
But that mechanical failure perfectly illustrates our next point. The autonomic nervous system might be the commander shouting the orders, but the cardiovascular system is the infantry actually executing them.
That's a great way to put it.
It delivers nutrients, oxygen, and pressure exactly where the tissues demand it.
And it does so by strictly obeying the Frank-Starling law of the heart.
Break that down for us.
Sure. In a steady state, the volume of blood the heart pumps out, which is the cardiac output, must perfectly match the volume of blood returning to it via the veins, the venous return.
So what goes in must come out.
Exactly. The myocardial cells actually stretch based on the volume of blood filling the ventricle. That physical stretch optimizes the overlap of contractile proteins, actin and myosin, inside the muscle fibers.
So stretching it makes it work better.
Right. The optimal overlap means the heart contracts more forcefully. More blood stretching the chamber equals a stronger contraction pushing that blood out.
Okay, let's look at this infantry in action during exercise. Costanzo describes a brilliant dual control mechanism here.
Oh, this is one of my favorite parts.
When you start running, there is a central command from your cerebral motor cortex. It essentially anticipates the exertion and immediately increases sympathetic outflow.
Before you even really need the extra oxygen.
Yeah, your heart rate shoots up, increasing cardiac output, but at the exact same time, down in your actual running legs, local responses take over.
Because as the skeletal muscles work harder, they consume oxygen and produce local vasodilator metabolites like lactate and adenosine.
And what do those do?
These local chemical signals force the arterioles in the specific working muscles to dilate. This drops the total peripheral resistance in those specific tissues.
So the central command cranks up the pump, and the local metabolites open the floodgates only in the tissues demanding the oxygen.
It is incredibly efficient.
But here's where it gets really interesting. What happens when the crisis isn't just a jog in the park, but a massive hemorrhage?
Right, a true trauma scenario.
The text contrasts two clinical cases, Adam and Ben, who both suffer severe blood loss. When you lose that much blood volume, your mean arterial pressure plummets.
It crashes.
And this triggers a fast neural baroreceptor reflex. Carotid sinus baroreceptors detect the pressure drop and literally scream at the brainstem to constrict blood vessels and spike the heart rate.
They're trying to save the system.
But here is my question. If the body's ultimate goal is to deliver oxygen to tissues, why does the baroreceptor reflex actively choke off the blood supply to the skin and the kidneys during severe blood loss?
Well, the body has to perform a ruthless triage based on the brutal logic of survival.
Ruthless triage. I like that.
When blood volume is critically low, there simply isn't enough fluid pressure to perfuse the entire body. You just don't have the volume.
So it has to choose.
Exactly. The baroreceptor reflex drastically increases sympathetic outflow, which binds to alpha-1 receptors on the arterioles of non-vital organs. We're talking the skin, the gut, the kidneys.
Wow.
This causes intense vasoconstriction, literally clamping down the pipes to those organs.
It sacrifices them to keep the core alive?
It sacrifices the kidneys and the skin to preserve whatever mean arterial pressure is left, because that pressure is the literally only thing keeping blood flowing against gravity to the brain and through the coronary arteries to the heart itself.
So in Adam's case, this intense vasoconstriction, which is why his skin became cold and pale and his urine output completely stopped, that kept his brain alive long enough to get a transfusion.
Yes, his compensatory mechanisms held out.
But in Ben's case, the blood loss was too great. The compensatory mechanisms failed, The intense vasoconstriction led to fatal ischemia in his organs, and he couldn't be saved.
It is a desperate mechanism operating on a razor's edge.
It really is. That cardiovascular triage saves the brain,
Yeah.
but, you can only starve the kidneys of blood for so long before they panic and trigger a totally different systemic alarm.
Right, because blood flow is completely useless if the blood is toxic or if the total volume is collapsing.
Exactly. So we have to look at the ultimate chemical filtration plan, renal and acid-base physiology.
And this brings us right back to fluid compartmentalization. Fluid shifts dictate everything the kidneys do.
Because they're managing the aquarium.
They manage these shifts and the acid-base balance by constantly measuring and manipulating osmolarity, which is the concentration of osmotically active particles drawing water toward them in a fluid.
And depending on how you lose fluid, the shifts are entirely different.
Totally different.
If a patient has severe diarrhea, they are losing fluid that has the exact same osmolarity as their extracellular fluid. So that is an isosmotic volume contraction.
The concentration stays the same, you just have less volume.
Right. But if they are sweating heavily in the desert, sweat is actually more dilute than blood. They are losing more water than salt.
Which changes the math completely.
It does. That leaves the remaining extracellular fluid highly concentrated with solutes. That is a hyperosmotic volume contraction.
And the kidneys have to sort all of this out to prevent cells from literally shrinking or smelling.
Let's analyze the vomiting scenario from the text because this blew my mind.
It is quite the domino effect.
When someone vomits repeatedly, they are losing gastric hydrochloric acid. Losing that much acid leads directly to metabolic alkalosis. The blood pH becomes way too high.
That's the first step, yes.
But vomiting doesn't just lose acid, it loses massive amounts of fluid volume. It causes extracellular fluid volume contraction.
Right.
And when that volume drops, the kidneys sense the decreased perfusion pressure. The juxtaglomerular cells in the kidney instantly release the enzyme renin, kicking off the renin-angiotensin-2-aldosterone cascade.
Because the body is essentially panicking about the low volume, it releases aldosterone, which is a steroid hormone that acts on the principal cells of the kidneys collecting ducts.
And what's its main job?
Its directive is to save sodium and water at all costs to rebuild blood volume.
But aldosterone has a steep cost.
A very steep cost. To reabsorb that sodium from the urine back into the blood, the kidneys' exchange pumps have to kick out hydrogen ions and potassium ions into the urine.
Wait, so throwing up stomach acid doesn't just mess with your blood pH, it actually forces your kidneys to dump potassium.
Exactly. It is a brutal trade-off. The body is essentially deciding that dying from low blood volume today is a much bigger threat than having your potassium crash tomorrow.
Wow.
It prioritizes fixing the immediate physical leak by releasing aldosterone. But because aldosterone increases the secretion of hydrogen, which makes the alkalosis even worse, by the way, and it increases the secretion of potassium, the patient ends up with severe hypokalemia, low potassium.
So the body's desperate attempt to fix its fluid volume inadvertently creates a life-threatening electrical problem for the heart.
That's exactly what happens.
We see a similar, though maybe less acutely destructive, partnership in patients with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD.
Yes, the respiratory system and the kidneys are intimately linked.
Because these patients have chronic poor ventilation, carbon dioxide gets trapped in their blood. And elevated CO2 acts as an acid, creating a chronic respiratory acidosis.
Right. And because the lungs are failing to exhale the CO2, the kidneys have to step up to manage the acid-base balance.
They compensate.
Over several days, they compensate by actively reabsorbing and generating more bicarbonate in the proximal tubule to buffer that trapped CO2, pushing the blood pH back toward a livable normal.
Okay, so while the kidneys are executing these long-term adaptations, they are taking their orders from the grand orchestrator, which is the endocrine system.
The endocrine system is fascinating.
If neural reflexes like the baroreceptor response handle the immediate bleeding out emergencies, the endocrine system plays the long game.
It does.
It uses chemical memos hormones to set the baseline rules for the entire body.
And it manages this almost exclusively through negative feedback loops.
Which, instead of the cliche thermostat analogy, I like to think of the endocrine system like an automated supply chain algorithm for a massive warehouse.
A warehouse. Okay, tell me more.
The warehouse is the body, and the inventory is a specific hormone. When inventory drops, the algorithm automatically orders more from the factory, which is the endocrine gland. But the crucial part is the feedback. The moment the warehouse shelves are full, a signal goes back up the chain to pause production. It doesn't blindly keep ordering until the warehouse overflows.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. And the mechanisms these hormones use to actually change cellular function are incredibly sophisticated.
Wow.
Take steroid hormones, for example. Unlike peptide hormones that have to dock on the surface of a cell because they are water-soluble, steroid hormones are lipophilic.
Meaning they love fat.
Exactly. They literally dissolve right through the lipid bilayer of the cell membrane, bypassing the surface receptors entirely, and they move deep into the cytosol or the nucleus.
And once they're inside, they bind to a specific receptor. Then comes the really crucial step, dimerization.
Yes, dimerization is key.
Imagine two separate hormone receptor puzzle pieces finding each other and linking arms. Only when they snap together do they form the functional key required to interact with the cell's genetic code.
And those linked receptors bind directly to steroid-responsive elements, or SREs, on the DNA itself.
On the actual DNA.
Directly on the DNA. By binding there, they trigger the transcription of messenger RNA, leading to the synthesis of entirely new proteins.
So they are changing the cell from the inside out.
They literally rewrite the cell's function, which is why steroid effects take hours or days to fully manifest, unlike a neural reflex, which takes milliseconds.
You know, we also have to address a classic anatomical misconception here while we're talking about hormones.
Oh, the posterior pituitary myth.
Yes, we often learn that the posterior pituitary gland makes antidiuretic hormone, ADH, and oxytocin. But Costanzo's text makes it very clear. They are actually synthesized way up in the hypothalamus.
Right, specifically in the supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei.
So the posterior pituitary is just a storage unit.
Basically, yeah. They travel down the axons and are merely stored and released by the posterior pituitary. That distinction really matters because it illustrates that the brain and the hormone system aren't just separate entities.
They're physically linked.
The brain physically extends into the endocrine system to control fluid balance and reproduction directly. But let's analyze what happens when your supply chain analogy breaks down.
Like in Addison disease.
Exactly. Primary adrenocortical insufficiency. In Addison disease, the adrenal cortex is destroyed, often by an autoimmune process, and it utterly fails to produce the steroid hormone cortisol.
The warehouse is empty.
The warehouse is completely empty. And without cortisol in the blood, the negative feedback signal, that memo telling the factory that the warehouse is full, is completely gone.
So the anterior pituitary gland, which is supposed to be reading that cortisol level, just sees a zero.
It panics. It pumps out massive amounts of adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, in a desperate, screaming attempt to stimulate the unresponsive adrenal glands.
But the glands are destroyed, so it doesn't work.
Right. And because of how ACTH is synthesized from a larger precursor protein, this massive overproduction has a highly visible side effect.
The hyperpigmentation.
Yes. The precursor molecule is cleaved into ACTH, but it also produces melanocyte-stimulating hormone. Ah, I see.
So the high levels of this hormone overstimulate the pigment-producing cells in the skin. The patient develops a deep hyperpigmentation, particularly in their skin creases and gums.
So it is literally a visible outward sign of an internal broken feedback loop.
Exactly. It's the algorithm crashing in real time.
You know, stepping back and looking at all of this, from the intracellular fluid locked inside our cells, to the Starling forces dictating pressure in our capillaries, to the baroreceptors guarding our arteries, and the SREs rewriting our DNA, every single mechanism is inexplicably integrated.
It really is.
A disruption in one tiny fluid compartment echoes through the kidneys, changes the heart rate, and shifts the hormones.
It is a singular, unified blueprint of life.
It's beautiful, honestly. Now, to fulfill our educational mission today, I want to directly challenge you, the listener, with a review question to test your clinical instincts based on what we've covered.
Oh, a pop quiz? I love it. Ready. Imagine a patient runs a marathon on a hot September day and loses 3 liters of sweat without drinking any fluids. Based on what we discussed regarding renal physiology, what specific type of volume contraction are they experiencing, and what happens to their plasma osmolarity?
This is a great test of the concepts.
I'll give you a second to think about it. Okay, if you said hyperosmotic volume contraction and noted that their plasma osmolarity increases, you are absolutely correct.
Spot on. Because remember, sweat is hyposmotic compared to blood. You are losing more water than salt, which leaves the remaining extracellular fluid highly concentrated. Well done if you got that.
We've seen how perfectly calibrated the human body is to bounce back from acute stressors today. You know, a sudden hemorrhage, a sprint, a bout of vomiting. But this massive interconnected web of reflexes leaves us with a profound final thought to consider.
It really does. Because we evolved to survive acute short-term physical crises. But how does modern chronic low-grade psychological stress hijack these physical negative feedback loops?
That's the million-dollar question.
If you are constantly triggering that central command from the brain, constantly elevating your cortisol without a physical release like fighting or fleeing, does the supply chain algorithm of your endocrine and cardiovascular systems eventually adapt to a dangerous new normal?
Wow.
Do we reset our own baseline for disease by forcing an acute survival mechanism to run perpetually in the background? It is a critical concept for anyone studying the reality of modern medicine to deeply investigate.
That is something to really mull over. We want to thank you for taking this deep dive into the blueprint of human life with us today. The body isn't a map of isolated organs, and it isn't a collection of separate parts. It is one beautifully integrated environment.
It's been a pleasure exploring it.
Keep questioning, keep connecting the dots, and keep learning.